and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my chop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day prepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclosure big holes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bought your great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio on UCY.TV. This is your one and only host, Chris J., and one and only co-host, Al Shores, is with me here in the studio.
How's it going?
We are 2 days after the official 75th anniversary of Leon Trotsky's death in Mexico. The day before, actually, was when he was attacked at his study in Mexico, where a NKVD agent, going by was his real name, Ramon Mercader, was did the assault on Leon Trotsky.
We got a caller coming in, Chris, real quick. Is this Luciano?
Yes.
All right, Luciano, we're going to introduce the rest of the program, then we're going to let you come in, and then hopefully your friend can call in, too. Go ahead, Chris.
But, yes, 75 years ago, Leon Trotsky was assaulted in his private study.
Yeah, he was assaulted in Coyoacan, outside of Mexico City, down the street from Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera's home where he used to live. He was in his own home that they had barricaded to prevent another assassination attempt, because in May of 1940, they shot up his place, and he was remarkably unharmed. He had to hide underneath his bed when the bullets were entering his bedroom with his wife, and his grandson, actually, who was just a child then, who lived with them in the other room, did get wounded in the attack. Luckily, it was a superficial wound on the foot, but by August that year, the second attempt was by Mercader, who went by the alias Frank Jackson, who used the passport of a Canadian who died in the Spanish Civil War. I wanted to give a brief quote from Trotsky, but Chris, you wanted to feel anything else, or?
Well, I just wanted to point out is that for people that don't really understand the utter significance of the show and Leon Trotsky's legacy, I think people don't realize how many people he influenced later, including Che Guevara himself, who's sometimes considered the ultimate revolutionary of the 20th century or even of all time. And Leon Trotsky did influence him, especially later in his career when, Che had went to Bolivia. He already had been influenced by Trotsky. At first, he was supportive of Stalin only because of the fact that nobody really knew the extent of Stalin's crimes right after.
I'm not even sure he was ever supportive of Stalin. Certainly, he was sympathetic to the Russian Revolution. But there is evidence, for example, his relationship with Ernest Mendel, a Belgian Trotskyist, an internationalist. He was like an advisor towards Che. And also the fact that in Bolivia, when they recovered his belongings, he had a book written by Trotsky there. I'm not sure which book it was, but he definitely had some influence by that time in the late 60s. And I wanted to go ahead and read the quote. It was written in 1930, a couple years after Trotsky was exiled. And it comes from his book, The Permanent Revolution. The completion of the socialist revolution with the national limits is unthinkable. One of the basic reasons for the crisis in bourgeois society is the fact that the productive forces created by it can no longer be reconciled with the framework of the national state. From this follow, on the one hand, imperialist wars, on the other, the utopia of a bourgeois United States of Europe. The social revolution begins in the national arena. It unfolds on the international arena and is completed in the world arena. Thus, the social revolution becomes a permanent revolution in a newer and broader sense of the word. It attains completion only in the final victory of the new society on our entire planet. So I think the context of that quote was Stalin believed in kind of a national type socialism, in socialism in one state. And that's not to equate him with Nazis, with National Socialists, although he did have a pact with Hitler at one time. But Stalin was for socialism in one state, and Trotsky was for socialism, international socialism, the permanent revolution. And Marx had talked about permanent revolution. Lenin had finally given in to permanent revolution.
Let me clear something up immediately before we get into the show, because there's some, again, people from the InfoWars sphere of conspiracy theorizing, cherry picking, whatever false methods of reporting they use that say that what Trotsky's referring to by permanent revolution is the New World Order, that he won the New World Order. This is the.
I'm going to get into that, but let me just make a brief analogy on Europe in relation to the quote. He said the bourgeois United States of Europe. That's what we see today. The EU is a bourgeois unity. Yes, they're more socialistic than the United States, but they're far from ideal. Look what's going on in Greece. So what Trotsky called for was United Socialist States of Europe. And that's what they need to form with the other nations, Italy, which is in recession now, Ireland that's in debt, Spain, Portugal, etc. These other European nations, in solidarity with each other, need to leave the Eurozone and form the United Socialist States of Europe under the banner of internationalism. Luciano, you lived for a time in Spain just like me. By the way, Luciano is an artist or a rapper out of Philly that I protested with when I was up in the Forum a couple months ago. Luciano, from your European experience, and I'm sure you still have friends and comrades in Europe, what do you think about that, building an alternative to the EU?
Can you repeat that again, please?
Building an alternative to the EU in Europe. Because you had lived a couple years in Spain, so I'm asking you.
Union?
Yeah, what do you think would be a good alternative, like building a United Socialist States of Europe to counter the EU and its capitalist domination?
Oh man. First of all, I think there's a lot of differences with the Europe and United States, because they have their students, like their youth is more political. They're all into what is like the left party, the right party. They understand everything about what's going on. They see a bigger picture. And here, the youth is not really, educated about what's going on. They just see what they see, and they kind of brainwashed with all this TV and radio, music and stuff. So I don't think, I don't know, there has to be a big, we had to start a movement here in order to, to go over and fight or try to make a change,
Well, look at the international brigades in Ukraine, right? So you have fascists that took over in Ukraine. They want to force Ukraine to be part of NATO and the EU. I mean, what do you think about that?
Wait, can you repeat that again, please?
So Ukraine has a civil war going on right now, which you're aware of. So right now there's international brigades joining up with the East against the fascists that are trying to force Ukraine to be part of the EU. So what do you think about that situation?
Oh, man. I wouldn't know what to tell you. I wouldn't know what to tell about that.
Well, you know what? I want to bring out a point is that, again, of course, there's exceptions. We have to look at the exceptions of the youth, and we have to try to build on it. Not all of everybody has to be awake for revolution to happen, but a lot of the youth has to be true. But we can build upon what we have now. I mean, there's one exception, not to be bragging, on this show right now that's talking currently to you guys, that was able to make this radio show know enough to bring all the shows I have. And I've actually brought the attention to a few people. I mean, I actually had a small organization when I was in high school, which was actually just a few months ago. And I talk about it like it was something way back in the past, called the Students of for Workers and Liberty, which was a libertarian-leaning socialist-leaning principles against corporatization of the planet, globalization against fascism. So I think that when it comes to, we learned a lesson from the Russian Revolution is that the youth need to be the vanguard of revolution, or else revolution doesn't happen. But I think that, I think in some ways people don't realize how close we are, but we just need to make certain steps towards that. We're right now, I think we're starting the stages of rebellion. Rebellion is the pre-stage to revolution. And I think if if the youth really, we need to go out there and educate the youth about what's really going on. Tell them what their schools are not telling them. That's what I try to do from inside of high school.
I think the problem here in the United States is that we don't pay attention to we don't tell the youth, this is going on. We don't enforce it in our own communities, We're paying attention to other things instead of what's really going on and what really affects the community.
They give many distractions to the youth to make sure that they don't turn on to politics. I mean, they have these, they keep them on the useless side of social media where they're just, sending, they're just putting on Facebook pictures of, trying to brag about how much more fun they're having than their other friends or whatever. Or, the other side of social media, unfortunately, and I hate to be so blunt about it, is that they're sending dick pics to each other, and when they could be doing something productive actually on there. But there's reasons why.
Well, they're more obsessed with, the Kardashians and, or Trump, who's not really a politician. He's not a professional politician. Trump is a celebrity. So when we talk about politics, you're talking about a celebrity, what his hair looks like, the most trivial things, and they can't give a reason why they support a particular candidate when it comes to policies. Because my parents like him, or because he's black, or because he's a celebrity.
He's cool, whatever.
Right.
Yeah,
So the celebrity culture is counterproductive. The obsession over Kardashian. Why not obsess over justice and policy and things that can change the world? And it's very intentional the way student debt is set up in the United States. Chomsky's talked about this. Student debt is set up where it's not a right, and then when you leave college, instead of going and changing the world, because the youth are the vanguard that essentially lead their revolts, you want to look for work to pay off your debt. And you're not focused on the things that you need to be focused on. So that's why student debt in the capitalist system in the United States is set up the way it is.
Well, yeah.
Also, there's a lot of selflessness.
You cannot change it with the Bernie Sanders. If anything, Trotsky was a revolutionary. And to be a real revolutionary, you cannot work within the constraints of the system or within nationalism. You have to be an internationalist, cosmopolitan in scope, and replace the system with a revolutionary movement that is organized. That was something that was not occupied. I'm talking about the organizational aspect of it,
I also think that's one of the problems. We have a lot of quote unquote revolutionary movements and a lot of revolutionary organizations that they actually get in they get money from corporations and companies, and they're not gonna go all the way in. They're gonna go probably halfway until they're gonna stop. They're not going to be loyal to the movement like Trotsky was.
It's like decomposed.
Their money coming from somewhere.
Trotsky was on the front lines, defending Leningrad when they wanted to move the capital to Moscow. Real revolutionaries will fight on the front lines. Bolivar, when he fought for the liberation of Latin America, was always on the front lines. Decades before the United States, Bolivar abolished slavery. I mean, these men were revolutionaries, and Bolivar wasn't a Marxist, and Trotsky even conceded this. You don't have to be a Marxist to have been a revolutionary. But to be a real revolutionary in the Marxist sense, adapted to the 21st century, such as what Chavez did, is quite a revolutionary thing.
Right, and also a lot of college students are doing it just for the romanticism of it. Right. They don't really feel it. They don't know what's going on, and a lot of people are actually looking for their self progress, and then trying to join the movement for X reasons,
Well, students are suspended left and right in this country. I was temporarily suspended for my activism at college. I mean, they're suspended over their activism, or they're trying to find an excuse to go after them because they are activists. So it's not being easy being an activist, being a student. But if you're willing to take that risk, that's the test of a revolutionary. If you're just an opportunist trying to have a good time, that's a whole other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are into certain political stuff because it needs to be addressed. Like I said, is that for example, there's a reason why people jump aboard these fake revolutionaries like Bernie Sanders, because it's the cool thing, it's the trendy thing to join the Bernie Sanders campaign, and that's what you're seeing mostly in his campaigns. You look all around, it's the stereotypical hipsters right there. You got the people.
But who's lobbying for him though?
And look out. Another thing of Bernie Sanders is that he supports Hillary Clinton. He said that he likes Hillary Clinton, and he joined the Democrat Party. I mean, it really shows
he's
what
not
kind
as much a sellout as Hillary Clinton. I'll give him that, but certainly he's not fighting Hillary as he should. He said, "She's my friend. I don't want to attack her." But in the end, he's going to endorse her, and that's not what a revolutionary would do.
No. And look, and also another thing is that Bernie Sanders supports the something that's the opposite of what true revolutionaries stand for. He supports the Americans' imperialistic foreign policy and supports DC's trying to put a corporate fascist hegemony over the planet. He has towed the party line with Obama and the Republicans and all the mainstream Democrats on Russia. He's pretty much said Sanders said that they need to take action against Russia, and that apparently it's the Russia's fault for what's going on in Ukraine, which makes absolutely no sense when you look at the United States supported the fascist coup in Ukraine, and now what you see in East Ukraine are just people defending their homeland from the fascist takeover.
This is the homeland of Trotsky. A lot of people don't realize that. I actually talked to a Ukrainian girl once who had an argument with me, insisting that Trotsky was born in Russia. So there's even people from Ukraine who don't even know he was born there. He was born in the south of Ukraine, in an area where there was a lot of Jewish people that were escaping pogroms from other part of Russian-controlled area. So there was already anti-Semitic pogroms going on at the behest of the Tsar, which actually inspired Hitler. He referred to the Tsar in Mein Kampf in his book. So he expanded upon the anti-Semitic campaigns, and that was very much part of the Bolshevik and the Socialist Revolution in Russia, was ending the persecution of minorities. And I wanted to go ahead. I mean, Luciano made a wonderful flyer for our program. I wanted to go ahead and read the first flyer in case people didn't see it, with the description of the show, because it really details what I put in 3 paragraphs, the life of Trotsky, so people can really get a background on it. And then as soon as I finish reading it, I'll put the number out in case Il Mascaras, the masked man, needs to call in. So in case he didn't get the number out, because he's our third guest, who's a friend of Luciano.
He's gonna call probably in the second hour, I think, because
so the second part, that's fine. He never promised for the entire show. This will be a 2-hour show, so I'm going to go ahead and read this real quick. It says right here, 75th anniversary of the assassination of Leon Trotsky. Chris J. and Al Suarez of Voice of Rebellion Radio, with special guest Luciano de la Vega from Philadelphia and Mascaras from LA, will be discussing for 2 hours Sunday evening the legacy of one of the greatest revolutionaries ever known, Leon Bronstein Trotsky. In the year 1940, on August 20th, the coward Spanish Stalinist agent Ramon Mercader, using the alias Frank Jackson, hit Trotsky from behind with an ice pick. By the next day, the man second only to Lenin in the Russian Revolution was dead in his home of exile in Mexico at the age of 60. Leaving behind a legacy of persecutions from the Tsar to Stalin himself, Trotsky was among the last of the old guard of Bolsheviks killed on Stalin's orders. Trotsky rose to fame and power under Lenin when the revolutionary government took over in Petrograd, later to be named Leningrad in the October Revolution, carried out on Trotsky's birthday. Trotsky, a Ukrainian Jew from a town outside of Odessa, of Russian nationality, invented the hammer and sickle on the Soviet flag and invented the Red Army, comprised of former Tsarist officers who went to the Red side. The ragtag army, through Trotsky's leadership, was able to kick out an invasion force back in the White Guards in the Russian Civil War, which preceded the revolution, ending by the early 1920s. Upon the end of the war, Russia faced embargo, had just finished its participation in World War I. It was in shambles. Stalin took advantage of the conditions in Russia and quickly consolidated power against the wishes of Lenin, according to Lenin's political testament. With Lenin sick after an assassination attempt and a stroke, Stalin did all he could to avoid Trotsky's rise to power. Eventually, Trotsky was internally exiled, sent to Soviet Central Asia in 1928, and ultimately sent to Turkey in 1929. Trotsky and Turkey went to the island of Prinkovo and avoided getting killed by White Guard exiles or Stalinist agents. He also visited Europe, but went back to Turkey since he was not able to get asylum there, yet having gone to Italy to visit. Eventually going back to Europe after his original residence was burned down, Trotsky for a time got asylum and went to hiding in France, and also had a brief stay in Denmark. Pressured by Nazis and Stalinists, Norway caved in and had Trotsky under house arrest. Thanks to the efforts of Mexican painter and Trotsky sympathizer, Diego Rivera, Trotsky was able to obtain asylum in Mexico in 1937, where he spent the last 3 years of his life. One of the few failing members of Trotsky who avoided being liquidated by Stalin, Trotsky's young grandson Seva, who was later renamed Esteban, was able to make it out of Europe alive and live with his grandparents, along with Trotsky's second wife, Natalia, whom he called Natasha, in Mexico. He maintains the home Trotsky had after he left Diego and Frida's home as a museum, where Trotsky's remains are buried. We will talk of the current problems of Mexico and how they are part of Trotsky's legacy as well. Also, Trotsky's idea of a united social state of Europe, how that can counter an EU as we see continued problems with Greece, etc. How Ukraine is in need of such a leader as fascists have taken over in Kiev, as Trotsky was among the first of intellectuals to warn us of the dangers of fascism. Similarities with other leaders like Tito of Yugoslavia and Che Guevara, as well as how Hugo Chavez was influenced by this great man. We will try to make time for callers. And the call-in number is 718-717-8296, and people can also call via Skype. Go ahead, guys.
Nice.
Well, anyways, we're talking about the people, Trotsky was influenced by. And again, it's funny, like, people will talk bad about Trotsky, other socialists sometimes, but they won't talk bad about the people that influence or even were, as Hugo Chavez actually was a lot more supportive than, some of these other people that you mentioned. He openly called himself a Trotskyist at one point.
He gave speeches talking about Trotsky, comparing him to Napoleon and saying that Trotsky was the better of leaders. And a lot of people say that Napoleon was similar to Stalin, kind of a betrayer of the revolution. I think Stalin personally was even worse than Napoleon. But certainly Trotsky was a real revolutionary, and Chavez accepted that. And there was a British Trotskyist who's fluent in Spanish. I forget his name. I think he's the founder of Venezuela. He was friends with Chavez. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, Alan Woods was the name, I think.
Yes, Alan Woods. That's right.
Yes,
he was kind of like Ernest Mendel was to Che. Yeah.
But, Chavez actually already took him power. This was around 2000. You were telling me the story. And, he was almost like, in a way, a political advisor to Hugo Chavez, an informal political advisor. And Chavez, again, at first wasn't exactly, he was revolutionary, but he wasn't, really completely on board with the socialist ideology.
Chavez to turn more to the left, because Chavez initially was center-left. And even Trotsky's grandson had met with Alan Woods. I remember this comrade. And recognized him as the closest to his grandfather's thinking. So Alan Woods is a very respected Trotskyist, and the fact that he was influencing Chavez makes it, without a shadow of doubt, that Chavez was influenced by Trotskyism. There's some that claim Chavez was a Stalinist, but that's utterly ridiculous.
The only thing they share in common, the weird thing is that they share in common the day they died. They both died March 5th, but I think they were actually, and also 60 years apart exactly. Which, I saw that one time there was a Stalinist put up a picture saying ripped, and said to Stalin and Chavez in the same post. I'm like, well, that's kind of a contradiction right there.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to point out something is that it's weird that we do the show today because also today is one of the biggest betrayals to the Russian people happened this day 76 years ago when Hitler and Stalin together signed a non-aggression pact. I
didn't realize the pact was today. That's unbelievable, Chris. What year was that? Was it 1939?
Yeah, I said 76 years ago, 1939. And then 8 days later, Hitler invades Poland on September 4th.
Wow, Chris, thank you for pointing that out. I had no idea. I knew the Spanish Civil War ended in 1939, but I didn't realize so soon after Stalin went ahead and joined up with the fascists. Stalin sabotaged the Spanish Revolution, made sure Franco would rise to power. Luciano, you were in Spain. Don't you agree that the Stalinist, meddling in Spain had backfired for the revolution?
Wait, say that again, please.
That the meddling of Stalin in the Spanish Civil War had subsequently backfired, right? Because we know that the fascists took over in Spain at that time.
Right. With Franco.
Exactly. Franco was supported by Mussolini and Hitler, correct?
Right, yeah. He was with Mussolini and Hitler.
And the anti-fascist forces were only supported by Cardenas, Mexico, and Cardenas who took in Trotsky, and Stalin. I heard a lot of the guns that Stalin sent didn't even work, and he went after the militias, including militias that had George Orwell in it, international brigades. They were actually fighting the fascists in the front line. They were persecuting these people because they weren't strict Stalinists. They weren't Stalinists at all. They were actually revolutionary.
Oh, there was a story, that I had a Spanish teacher that was actually from Spain, and she told me a story about Franco one time. And it kind of gave me really my first impression by Franco, because I was only like 13 when I had her as a teacher. And she told me that Franco, towards the end of World War II, like how Hitler had eventually, even though that Mussolini was his ally, he ordered Germany to officially take charge of Italy, was what he was going to do with Spain, unless that Franco submitted to the option that Hitler would be able to test a new bomb, I think it was, on one of Spain's villages, and apparently, there was a bombing the night after or something like that, and so it was very apparent. I think it was actually that same night. So it became apparent
that Franco, during the Civil War?
No, this is during World War II. This is towards the end of World War II when.
Wow. When they established a fake democracy, they was like, to the rest of the world, there was a democracy, but inside of the country, it was a whole different story.
Well, nobody ever claimed Spain was democratic till 1975, after Franco died and the king took over. He said, "I'm going to transition our country to democracy." But that's bourgeois democracy. That's not a democracy of the workers. I mean, Lenin said, "Workers' democracy is a million times more democratic than bourgeois democracy." So again, if you had a united social state of Europe, that'd be much more democratic than what we see as the EU, where the Greeks just had a referendum, clearly, and the majority did not want to accept the demands of the banks, specifically from Germany, and then they were crushed by that legislation as Tsipras caved into pressure. But the debt of the war reparations that Germany caused on the Greeks is more than even the debt that Greece has with Germany, and Germany never paid that. And back in the 50s, there was a meeting for peace where they said, "Okay, Germany, you don't have to pay it," but they could have never imagined what happened now. So apparently, according to German logic, it's worse to accept the debt than to invade and destroy a country.
No, again, what happened in Greece was a total betrayal, partially because people thought that Tsipras was actually Greece's first true leader that they've had in a while, the first leader that actually represented the will of the people, and he also showed, he showed, Trotskyist tendencies. I mean, Syriza has Trotskyist factions in it, and Tsipras played along with that. However, in the end, whether it was from cowardice or complete sellout that he committed for the Greek people, he, denied them their democratic option to not go to the demands of the EU creditors. And now look at what Greece is going to have. They're going to have years of austerity. It's going to be rough. And and Tsipras is not resigning, is what should be mentioned. And now there's going to be new elections in Greece. And now Golden Dawn has a high chance to take this opportunity because they have a lot of support, and they've gotten a lot more support during this whole Greek crisis. And there might be a chance that what we thought was going to become a revolutionary state might become a fascist stronghold this year. Now, I hope that what happens is Syriza sends a guy that actually stood with the vote of going against the EU creditors, and that becomes the new prime minister. However, I think one lesson that could be learned from that is that, and this is what they did an article in RT about this, is that sometimes these people that say that are left or for the people are not really in that. It's really just a title, and sometimes it goes the opposite way. Like de Gaulle, he was technically conservative. However, he did a lot for the French people, and he liberated Algeria. The
French legionnaires, who were basically ex-Nazis, the Vichy government in southern France collaborated with the Nazis. I mean, they're the ones that tried to take de Gaulle out for leaving Algeria and Indochina before it became Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So, de Gaulle had, was an imperialist, but certainly he wasn't imperialist enough for the French Legion. And the French Legion were professional killers. I mean, up until Vietnam, regular armies didn't carry out the killing in occupying countries. They left it to professional killers and far-right groups like the French Legionnaires. So, there was a lot of problems with that when the Americans eventually took over Vietnam. And the Americans did finance the French occupation of Vietnam as well. I don't want to get too off topic, but imperialism is imperialism. And it was clear to men like Che, who we mentioned earlier, that you cannot trust imperialism. He didn't want UN monitors or anybody in Cuban territory when he was at the top of Cuban government at that time. Lumumba was assassinated under the UN flag in the Congo in Africa shortly before that. And Che himself went to the Congo before Bolivia. So that's what revolutionaries do. They practice what they preach, and they're willing to give that ultimate sacrifice on those revolutionary beliefs.
Well, another person that was kind of influenced by, we haven't went in depth yet, but you said his name earlier in the description, was of course Tito. Tito, he really stood by his beliefs and didn't bow down to anyone. That was including, he fought actually in a total of 3 major wars, and that was, he didn't bow down to the Tsarists, he didn't bow down to the, to the Nazis in World War II, and he didn't bow down to Stalin when Stalin was threatening his life.
With the Italians. As a matter of fact, the Italians originally had control of Yugoslavia, or before Yugoslavia existed, like the Balkans, let's say. They couldn't handle it because of the resistance from men like Tito. So that's when they brought in the Germans. But the Germans ultimately failed. When Stalin tried to intimidate Tito, that also failed. Yugoslavia was part of the Comintern, the international group, the communist group of different countries allied with the Soviet Union. And they've always had an independent stance. The only country in the Comintern in 1927, I believe, who didn't go along with voting Trotsky out was Yugoslavia. So Yugoslavia was also expelled for not voting along with that. And Trotsky's wife was Serbian. She was from, Yugoslavia then. So certainly there was a good relationship between Trotskyists and Titoists. And, Stalin interchangeably accused his opponents of being Titoists and Trotskyists as if they were the same thing, which they're not, but they're similar. He was able to unite other people, Tito. Go ahead.
Tito had a lot of influence by Trotsky, and the way that he governed his country. A lot of people say that, that a lot of people refer to Yugoslavia as the freest socialist country that has ever existed, which I think is kind of a bad name to it because it almost makes it seem like, that in general socialist countries are not free, but just that in comparison to Stalin and the countries that Stalin were aligned with, so Yugoslavia was a bright spot in East Europe. In Yugoslavia, if you ask any person that ever lived there during the time, which I've only seen on documentaries and only know one person off of Facebook, that actually lived in Yugoslavia that can remember.
And Macedonia part of Yugoslavia, right?
Yeah. One of the people that actually shares our show sometimes, she said it was a lot better time back when it was Yugoslavia compared to now with all the trouble of all the trouble.
Now they're divided up between Serbia, Kosovo, and the EU instigated that division along with NATO. The tearing up of Yugoslavia post Tito within 10 years.
NATO bombed Yugoslavia 19 years after Tito died. That was in 1999. It was no longer the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, should be noted. When it was bombed, it was the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. And all I think that was left was Bosnia and Serbia in it. And they instigated the last split in 2003. That's when officially they split apart. And that made the separation into the many different countries. Now, what used to be one country is now like 6 countries. There's
But the early 90s is really when they started to split up, and it culminated with the NATO bombings.
Was the NATO bombing, then the official 2003 split that ended Yugoslavia, and after that there was no longer a country with the name Yugoslavia on the map after 2003.
It's now Serbia and Montenegro. That was the last of the countries that call itself Yugoslavia. By then, most of the lands had already been separated. I wanted to ask Luciano a question because I know he's a big fan of Che, and I believe most Guevaras at this point are Trotskyists, or at least Trotsky sympathizers. So we've talked about this, Luciano. You see a lot of similarities between the two, right? But particularly Che, why do you think he's admired by so many people throughout the world, in the Middle East and in countries, all different cultures?
Mm-hmm. Wait, can you repeat that again, please?
Yeah, we're having some audio problems. Just to let people know, Luciano was just writing me about it. I'll try to speak as loud as possible. Why do you think, Luciano, that Che is admired by so many people all over the world?
Why more people know Che and doesn't know about Trotsky?
I didn't say that, but why is he so popular among the masses, Che?
Well, I think it's more of a commercial thing because I think they both did the same. Actually, I think Trotsky did more because he actually had to fight with his own movement that was led by Stalin and back in his native country, you know? Back in
Che and Monge fought in Bolivia, right? The Communist Party of Bolivia under Stalinist orders were ordered not to help Che in Bolivia. So remember, there was a split that Che had to deal with in Bolivia as well, right?
Oh, man. See, I didn't know about that.
Well, everybody knows. You watch the movie, it shows that. I mean, the guy who was the leader of the Communist Party of Bolivia, you know, had a fallout with Che in Bolivia. And I don't think it was personality differences. It was Russia at that time had pressured Cuba and the Communist Party in Bolivia and other Latin American nations that wanted to join up not to support Che. And that was during the Sino-Soviet split. You know, some people accused Che of being a Maoist. He didn't accept labels, and he didn't go along the Stalinist line at that point. So that resulted in some differences.
Well, what actually happened was, you know, Brezhnev had signed some treaties already at that point in 1968 when Che was in danger. And in fact,
he died in 67, so that had been the year before.
No, it was 68. I thought it was 68 was when
Che.
He
died in October of 67.
I'm mistaken here, but anyways, by that time already, Brezhnev had been in power for a couple of years, and I think they already had signed a very crucial treaty with the West. You know, one of their treaties to kind of thaw out the Cold War. You know, in a bad way because it gave a lot of concessions to the West, and that meant that they could not help as part of the treaty any revolution west of or in the Western Hemisphere, and that
that was a deal that the Russian premier made with Nixon. That's right.
It wasn't with Nixon. It
was Johnson. It was Johnson, and then under Nixon, the Sino-Soviet split had culminated. Yeah.
No one caught that little joke I'm in? Okay, whatever. But yeah, you know, with the Lyndon Johnson, he made that treaty. Yeah, and that ended up being very bad because if that treaty had not been signed, I don't know, maybe Brezhnev would have helped Che, and then Che would be still alive, and who knows what would happen.
So Russia was clearly mad at Che, and there was ideological differences even between Che and Fidel towards the end as well. You know, Che, we know from his comrades that he had the cult of personality that was, you know, the bureaucracy that was being built up from Fidel. And Che went to the sugarcane fields. He was with the workers. You know, he supported the Cuban Revolution to the end, but certainly he saw there was some changes in Cuba that he didn't really like. And a lot of these differences were in private, but that later came out. But something that Luciano mentioned was the commercialization of Che. I think Che would find that comical because he had a dark sense of humor. So did Trotsky. They had a lot in common. You know, he was an anti-capitalist, and the way his name's being used to commercialize has backfired as well, because it has made his name more known, right, Luciano?
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think his fight was more known because he was more like in the radios, TVs around this, you know, this continent, which in Europe they still have like a lot of debates about Trotsky. Some people think that Stalin was a good guy and that Trotsky was a bad guy, but some other people think differently, you know?
I think the minority of leftists that I encounter at the forums would admit to being a Stalinist. They might be one in secret, but clearly the overwhelming majority are Trotskyists or Trotsky sympathizers. All the literature you see, almost every other book that they show in the forums is a Trotsky book or Che book. Very hard to find anything with Stalin's image on it. Maybe Mao, but you know, people are so outraged by just the image of Stalin that leftist forums now that they really don't show it. And that's really happened since the fall of the Soviet Union, which was kind of a vindication of Trotskyism, how capitalism was restored there, as Trotsky predicted. And there needs to be a new system in Russia. There's good and bad about Putin. But certainly, you know, the Russians need to make changes, and Europe as well. I mean, Ukraine, very clearly.
I want to ask you guys a question. Because this I think is really like is petty. In Spain, when I used to live in Spain, we watched a documentary about Trotsky, but I was from American Channel, from History Channel. So these guys, everybody in the classroom, even the teacher, they all started saying that Trotsky was probably a traitor because the imperialist United States was talking so good about him. You know? So
I never had anybody tell me that in Spain, but
like it's in Spain they have this thing that if America is talking good about you, then you must be a traitor.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people that unfortunately went over to the right who were former Trotskyists who still hold sympathies to him. But the majority of Trotskyists stay Trotskyists or stay leftists. You know what I mean? There are a few exceptions that they try to use and say, oh, you see, Trotskyism will ultimately make you a reactionary or right wing. But there's been some cases here or there, but obviously not the majority of people that follow the ideology, which is a continuation of Marxism or Leninism. Huh?
What American people, you know, they're saying because there's a lot of American fans of Trotsky that Trotsky must be a traitor. But let's look at how American government actually reacted to Trotsky when he was around. I mean, they almost had the same position on Trotsky as they had Che later on. You know, they labeled Che when he was, you know, in the middle of his
they were afraid of Trotsky's corpse. When the American Trotskys begged the U.S. government to let his corpse be brought to the United States for a funeral, they refused. So they were even afraid of his corpse. That's how afraid the U.S. government was of Trotsky.
Yes, you know, they almost had him labeled, you know, like he's, at the time, more dangerous than Stalin and more to the United States. And actually, well, the United States had actually sort of aligned themselves with Stalin due to World War II, I meant. You know, it was kind of they almost had labeled him as like one of the most dangerous people alive when Trotsky was around. I mean, Trotsky was not allowed in the United States when he was actually alive. And also,
he was only allowed in the United States when he was unknown to the world. After his role in the Russian Revolution, he was banned from the United States. There was no way they would give him asylum or even go for a meeting or nothing. It was even hard for him to go to a lot of European countries.
They even tried to laugh at him when he was living in the United States for some years. I think for 10 years he was living in the United States.
He lived in the United States for a few months in 1917, and as soon as he got word that the Russian Revolution was starting, the initial revolution under Kerensky, which failed before Lenin took power, he went on the first boat back to Russia, was held in Canada by British authorities, and finally let back to Russia. But he was only in New York a few months.
Oh, okay, then.
He was exiled from Spain at that time because he was going from European country, and he had enemies, you know, all over. He wasn't that known, but certainly the intelligence communities in these different European countries up to World War I was going on didn't like Trotsky. So he left Spain and he went to a little place where they take him, America, and he was literally only in New York a few months and then left the country.
Okay, yeah, I must remember wrong. I knew it was some time that he was living here after, and then he heard about the revolution that was starting against the Tsarist government, and then he went back.
He had by then, for almost 2 decades, actually for more than 2 decades, I believe he arrived in Britain in 1905, where he first met with Lenin when he was escaping the Tsar. So, you know, we're talking about 2 decades of Trotsky fighting for Russian Revolution. So it wasn't an opportunist, you know, oh, what's going on in Russia, I'm going to go over there. No, it's something that he had been doing for decades.
Yeah, he had tried before, but he always failed for A or B reason.
Well, you know, another thing is that, again, people start circulating rumors out there on the internet that are pretty popular, and I know that I'm surprised that nobody's called in and said anything about these rumors again about Trotsky meeting with various people in the United States. You know, one that they say a lot is Jacob Schiff of the from Wall Street. They try to say that he financed Trotsky's arrival back to Russia. And, you know, and they also say that, you know, a lot of the people that were fighting the Bolshevik Revolution were, you know, pretty much trained in Brooklyn, exported to Russia. You know, and again, they don't really have much of a logical flow to these rumors, but it's pretty much the same. It's the line of thinking that for some reason the West did not like the Tsar when they actually really liked the Tsar. I mean, they aligned themselves with the Tsar in World War I, and afterwards, they had accepted a lot of the people that were associated with the Tsar into the United States with asylum when they would have been arrested in Russia after the Bolshevik Revolution. In fact, one of the people who's actually trying to, Kerensky, you were talking about, the reason why he was overthrown is because he was trying to restore the monarchy. Actually, he was a complete traitor, and then Kerensky eventually fled to New York City, where he actually lived 53 years of his life later. He lived a very long life.
I'm sorry, it was October 1902 when Trotsky met Lenin, and he was already known as the Pen, as a Marxist journalist, and obviously he went from the Pen to a full-scale revolutionary a couple decades later. We got a caller in.
This is going to be.
You're on the air.
Right on. Hey, I take that challenge. I wish you guys was in chat. I think there's some interesting points being made there. But I think it has been documented that Trotsky left with $20 million in gold from the.
Why didn't the Canadian authorities take the gold from him?
Pardon?
Why didn't the Canadian authorities take the gold from him when they had him under arrest in Canada on his way back from Russia to Russia?
Yeah, good question. Because quite obviously he went to Russia, and he was escorted, and he was protected all the way through. Made it through Germany on a train with $20 million in gold. Now that's a pretty good piece of gold right there back in the day.
Let me interject on that. Is that the German government strategically liked the Bolsheviks just because the fact that the Tsar had an army that was killing them in World War I and killing tons of their people and their soldiers. So they did support the Bolsheviks, hoping that would eventually bring an end to the Russian involvement in the war, which
and
it
the
did.
Canadians were fighting the Germans. So you're saying the Canadians and the Germans working together to protect Trotsky's gold?
Look, I appreciate your guys' ideology, and
it's a question of facts.
There's good ideas in there. Let me go with this. There's good ideas there, but when you don't consider the fact that all wars have been bankers' wars, that it has always been for centuries these central bankers that create wars. Then there's, of course, allies on both sides. You look at the Bush family on that. It's good to have an ideology as a good that can come from something. But
the Bolsheviks ended World War I. They ended it. They ended Russia's role in it.
They also
said that wars are run by banks. The same revolutionary Russia said that.
Well,
and they canceled all foreign debts.
Thurman had signed that treaty after World War I. He said, "I'll lie in 20 years." That was set up. Even the treaty was set up for Germany to fail.
Well, Lenin, the very first thing he did when he took power in Russia was end all foreign debt Russia had with the banks. The banks immediately started financing the opposition at that point to take over Russia, yeah.
So,
and every bit of history has been co-opted by these powers that have been operating for a very long time. And I think that we all fall victim to the left-right paradigm, or it's somewhere in between. And I think it's very important to realize that people that we're calling heroes, and I'm talking about both sides here, from the right to the left, are nothing but traitorous, murderous bastards.
Well, Stalin definitely was a right-winger. You have a point there, because people claim that Stalin was a leftist. That's not true. Stalin was more to the right, and he had a pact with Hitler, as we mentioned earlier. So Stalin certainly betrayed the original principles of the Russian Revolution. And the real word for Bolshevik, which means you're part of the majority of the people, that's not what Stalin was about. So when Stalin took over after Lenin and then took out Trotsky a couple decades later, I mean, that's a part of history a lot of people don't go over.
Well, look, I can't know the man's heart, but I do know, by example, that if people that rise to power or front men of power, they either comply or they die, and that's the same way in life. And that's the powers we're fighting collectively at all sides. And then so many times we put ourselves at odds with one another, at odds with one another, defending some ideology that pretty much almost any well, I would say probably all ideologies are full of crap in one way or another.
Well, if you're being dogmatic, yes. If you're being an ideologue and a dogmatic person and sectarian person, I agree with you 100%. But, there's also ideologies that are open to all different philosophies, but that have principles that they maintain. And that's how I try to be. I try to have my principles, and I'm open to alternative views at the same time,
Right on. Well, hey, it's good talking to you. I hope you didn't wear yourself out too bad on your bike ride. And Chris, hey, I appreciate both of you guys. This is Vince, by the way. So anyways, hey, big love, y'all. And I'm back on listening to y'all on the radio.
All right, thank you, Vince.
Later.
Yeah, I guess he's on my friends list because he mentioned a bike ride that I talked about earlier. Is Vince? Is he also on UCY?
I don't think I've heard his name, but it seems like I've not from UCY. I think I've heard it on Facebook somewhere. Saw it on one of your friends. I don't know, but at least he was respectful. I got to give him credit for that, and at least he listened to our points. I mean, we've had it. I mean, remember the Ukraine show was a disaster especially at the beginning where they started. We had two just nut jobs call in, especially the one that was defending West Ukraine and Nazism at the same time. I mean, that was a bit crazy. And also, here's another fact I want to point out there is that, yes, the elite do have a preferred ideology, and it's very simple, because corporatism is the merger of corporate and state power. And the corporate and state power, when they're merged, they can make the most money for both the government and the corporations that get blended into one ugly group, one ugly blob of, exploitation. And that's also called fascism. And Mussolini said that fascism should be called the corporatism because it's the merger of corporate state power. Why didn't he call it that?
Yeah,
because
well, go ahead, yeah.
It was more. But I think the only reason Mussolini didn't call it corporatism is because at that time fascism didn't have a bad sound to it. But corporatism already does sound bad. But at that time fascism hadn't had a bad connotation because Hitler wasn't around. Mussolini didn't do his crimes yet. Franco, remember Mussolini was elected under a party called the Italian Fascist Party. It was just a cool new ideology at that point. But it was an ideology of money, an ideology of greed and exploitation for the richest. And in fact, when Mussolini took power, he got rid of Parliament and made the Union of Fascist Corporations, kind of like what's happening with our Congress here.
It's funny you mentioned Mussolini in that way because one of my classmates in college is Italian. And as Luciano said, the mentality of European students is much different than the American. I mean, there was literally a professor encouraging debate in the class. And, of course, I spoke up because he was saying something outrageous. Him and another student were in agreement that Social Security should disappear. So, yeah. And when the Italian student who already knew a little bit my views was looking at me like, are these guys for real? And, so after class we were talking about it, and he agreed with me in Italian. And he was born outside of Venice. He was like, yes, the United States is turning into a society like with Mussolini. For all I know, he has family who are anti-fascist. Most of the Italian people that I know that immigrated here to the United States, they're very anti-fascist. So we talked about that quote about the merger between corporation and the state and how the United States is turning into that. Who better than an Italian to agree with me on that? And, it's incredible what professors are calling for. And there's also professors that are contradictory because right-wingers tend to be dogmatic. But he's one of those right-wingers that's very open to debate. But he wants you to back it up with facts. So, I'm always prepared to bring out facts. And a lot of the students are younger than me. They don't have the preparation. But certainly you should never be afraid to challenge your professors. Trotsky, when he was in school, challenged his teachers. He was a natural rebel. But there's a difference between being a rebel and revolutionary because he was a journalist, a rebel, and then eventually became a revolutionary. And that's a process. That Che went through a similar process as well. He started as a doctor, member of the upper classes. And then, he was eventually able to become revolutionary and fight for the working class. So, Che was not just a Guevara. Che was a de la Serna. Anybody from Argentina knows that if you're de la Serna, you're part of the aristocracy. You're a descendant of the Viceroy, who was the last Viceroy of Peru. So he had connections with the Spanish aristocracy in his family, but he went against that. And his parents were rebels themselves. His parents were kind of black sheep in their families. His father was Spanish and Irish. His mother was the Spanish aristocracy. And his parents instilled in him that rebelliousness that culminated in Che by the time he reached Mexico and met with Fidel and Raul and other Cuban revolutionaries and decided to join in their struggle.
Well, yeah, and also one, you brought up the point again. It's like when I was in high school, I challenged my teachers. I challenged, I challenged my teachers especially because some of the stuff they were putting out, they were just literally putting stuff out of the antithesis of what I think when it comes to politics. Like literally the antithesis on some things like Like one teacher was like, "Oh, these damn conspiracy theorists making up. Why can't they just believe the story about Lee Harvey Oswald and JFK? You know, and tell why does people need to question, make up bullshit conspiracy theories? You know, he got pretty aggressive. I mean, he made it seem like conspiracy theorists were, you know, not only just misinformed, but he tried to make them seem like they were like a threat almost." And I just sat there. I didn't even have any words to say. It was too early in the morning that time. But the later on, he said something ridiculous. I'm just like, oh yeah, he said, "Oh, socialism, you lose all your rights. Why does anybody support it?" I'm like, we lost all our rights here. NADA, Patriot Act, and then all he has to say at the end is just, yeah, those are some pretty good points. And then, I mean, he pretty much conceded.
I mean,
he pretty much conceded to what I was saying, but it's like I think that again, when public school system is the indoctrination system. I'm glad that that's over with for me. And I think the
for prison pipeline, and Luciano's part of that effort, working with Sherry in Philly. He might want to talk about that. I mean, there's schools being shut down, and the only thing the kids can do in their communities is sell drugs and go right to prison in the Fort Prison complex. Is that right, Luciano? The for-profit prison, the prison industrial complex?
The private prisons that they are building in Center City, Philadelphia?
Exactly. Where you're at in Philly, that's a big problem, right? They're shutting schools down.
Yeah, I mean, you know that in Philadelphia, there's a lot of schools that also had lost their counselors to their students. They had lost their translators for the ESL classes. There's a lot of cuts and funds being cut from school systems because they have new projects, quote unquote projects, and it's mostly
discrimination. And Trump wants to exile 12 million people, because they speak Spanish or they're Mexican or they're undocumented. All that, getting rid of the translators to school, all that's part of discrimination, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy because all this. North Philadelphia, it's always looking like crap. But now that the Pope is coming, they have been renovating everything. They've been closing a lot of streets in Center City, a lot of streets in North Philadelphia. And guess where all that tax money comes from? To pay for all that. Us. But they don't have money. They don't have money to pay for ESL teachers, counselors. Some schools have cut even the security guard in the schools, but they have money to start renovating everything around Philadelphia.
Hey, Luciano, you mostly rap in Spanish, right?
Huh?
You mostly rap in Spanish, right?
Yeah.
Well, do you have like a rap song in English you want to say like the first part so people can hear how you rhyme?
Oh man, I had something, but it's in my house. I had prepared something, but
what do you rap about usually? Tell the listeners what you usually like to rap about. Obviously, it's activism, but what are the issues you like to go over?
Yeah, and when I rap, mostly I like to talk about the community of Philadelphia and also about our indigenous people from America, from the whole continent of America, that's being discriminated in the United States. And now with this Trump situation, I think, is a more urgent topic to touch on. So that's what I'll be talking about in my raps.
Yeah, so go ahead, Chris.
Well, I want to go to the next, another part of the show that we did the Ukraine show just a few weeks ago, where we're talking about what's going on in Ukraine. We're talking about West Ukraine's encroachment onto the East Ukraine territory. They have the self-proclaimed Novorossiya, or East Ukraine, that is in the Donbass and the Donbass region, Lugansk, Donetsk, and they're really that's just the start of the territory they want. They really want most of the actual geographically eastern Ukraine, all the way back as far west as Odessa, and so it looks like it's going to be a long fight. Trotsky, I think if he was around right now, he would definitely be in major support of what's going on in the East, in support of the resistance in East Ukraine. The international volunteers are coming from Ireland, coming from Spain. A lot of doctors have went to East Ukraine to volunteer their help. There's been volunteers. There's even been an American volunteer, and I know of one volunteer. I'm not going to say his name on air right now, but that I think it will be going. I actually know a few that I kind of saw who in this group, this Vladimir Putin group. How many people that would want to go to East Ukraine and.
Well, I think the second half of the show should be about Mexico because we haven't even really touched that yet. But I'm going to put.
Well, I just want to finish off the last point, and then we'll start talking about the next thing. But I'm just saying is I think that I just wanted to also to promote again is that we have our internet brigade. Hope maybe one day will actually become realized into a physical brigade actually in East Ukraine. Was the Leon Trotsky International Brigade and Anti-Fascist Brigade of Odessa. That's a very long name. Let me repeat it.
Odessa is still under the hands of the fascists. There was brutalization of the anti-fascist groups in Odessa. The president of Ukraine, or Western Ukraine, is from Odessa. Trotsky was from near Odessa. So Odessa is also ethnically Russian people. But this president was part of the Western Ukrainian minority in Odessa. And that part is not part of Novorossiya. And the people that are Russian there are being suppressed. I mean, they even try to make the Russian language illegal. That's the equivalent of making Spanish illegal in the United States, which they try to do in some states at some level. But since we're in the second half of the show, I'm going to put the number out before we get into the Mexican question, and it's 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296.
Well, Odessa is actually in the claimed territories of what Novorossiya eventually wants to liberate in the long run. It's not currently under control of Novorossiya forces. In fact, it's a pretty small area, unfortunately. It's actually under control of Novorossiya forces right now.
Yeah, and Odessa is the major port of Ukraine. So let's get into Mexico real quick. Chiapas has been the center of activism in Mexico for some time, and that's where Zapata was from. And Zapata, like Pancho Villa in the north, from the south, was part of the Mexican Revolution. And the Zapatistas, led by Subcomandante Marcos, they're right now in a very important united front or alliance with the students that are rebelling in Mexico against the U.S.-backed Peña Nieto, who robbed the election, who's a right-wing president, and also, along with the mayor of a town there, had ordered the execution of several student dissidents. And since then, there's been a revolt going on and an alliance with the Zapatistas who have been there protesting and resisting the government through arms for some time. And this is very exciting because at the U.S. border now, there's a potential revolution or overthrow of Peña Nieto, which could bring a more Cardenas-type president to Mexico.
Well, what I think about that is that I think that, the way when I was talking about to one of my Mexican comrades that lives in Mexico, he actually does live in Mexico right now. He was telling that the situation, a lot of the people do not support of Peña Nieto's presidency. Now we're 3 years into the presidency. He was elected back in 2012, where he robbed an election away from Obrador, who would have been a left-wing candidate or left-wing president, and also would have been his party's part of Foro de Sao Paulo, which is a leftist organization of Chavista, different left-wing parties across South America and Latin America. Mexico would have been a part of that and would have been definitely a big change for Mexico, but Peña Nieto robbed the election, and Peña Nieto is from the PRI party, which had a dictatorship of Mexico for 71 years from 1929 all the way to the year 2000, and now they're back in power. And right now the general opinion, again, is ever since the 43 students were kidnapped, many do blame the Mexican government or the Mexican government / drug cartels that they're in league with in the United States government that all kind of work in a dirty trio together in Mexico. Look up Operation Fast and Furious, and you can see more about that. I think Peña Nieto won't make it to 2018. I think that there'll be some kind of overthrow before that.
I agree.
And I think he actually has a very high likelihood. I think it's great. I think it's 55% or more chance that Peña Nieto won't see a re-election.
He went to Spain and he almost couldn't return to his own country. And there was even protesters in Spain that were confronting him, and Mexican exile in Spain that were confronting him. So wherever he travels now, he's being confronted. I mean, he came to the United States and there was a major protest there. So, Peña Nieto, there's going to be a revolutionary tribunal against him.
Well, I think Peña, if he actually faced a court, eventually he would face multiple charges of, the kidnapping for one, which can be looks like definitely traced back to him. It's not a mystery like almost.
They kidnapped and murdered those students. There's no doubt about it.
They even incinerated and disappeared the students. And there's a lot of questions being asked that haven't been answered by the cops or the government.
It's funny though. Right now, the only talk about Mexico we hear is from a eccentric billionaire that's all here right now in the United States about Mexico. Not any about the revolutionary events, but no, we hear about Mexicans coming to this country.
There's more going on in Mexico than El Chapo. They love to talk about the notorious guys in Mexico, but these incredibly brave students, these wonderful activists, you don't hear about them in the media.
That's what I was telling you about earlier, about how they brainwashing us with the media.
Yeah, it's Chapo versus Trump over tweets. It's bullshit. Focus on the reality.
Right. They just filter the information that they want us to know.
Yeah. El Chapo was one of the people that was helped by Operation Fast and Furious. And
Absolutely. Holder sent the guns to the cartel. He should have stepped down then. I mean, Luciano, you realize that, right? I mean, even though there's a border on the Mexican, there's a wall on the Mexican border. The United States is sending guns to the cartel. They're playing all different sides, right?
I heard about that, about the United States sending guns, and it was actually the CIA, right? Or
it was the Justice Department that was complicit, and they said that they accidentally got the guns. But it's bullshit. It's like they accidentally dropped supplies to ISIS, and they knew exactly where ISIS was. I mean, they accidentally do things all the time, and then you see the real reason why they're doing that.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing also that you mentioned ISIS is that the Mexican cartel actually they've beheaded more Americans than ISIS have had done, and they've killed many Americans.
Well, ISIS killed two. ISIS beheaded 2 Americans, right? So you compare that to any group, there's going to be more. But
I think the same situation is just that it's more a political war between ISIS and the United States than it is with the cartel and the
the United States sees it as another business deal. The United States DEA, the CIA, why are they in Afghanistan? In Afghanistan, when Afghanistan was under the Taliban, and I hate the Taliban, they exported 3% of the world's heroin trade. Now it's 93% of the heroin trade comes out of Afghanistan. You literally have soldiers, U.S. soldiers, guarding poppy fields so they can extract all that heroin. So it's a very lucrative business, and it's in there with the arms industry.
Well, again, is that the Middle East? There's all the motives are. That's where all the motives are completely misshown. The media lies constantly about the Middle East, and they make it so complex, which is very complex. It's easy to lie about and just mix up a couple things of what's going on, and now they completely have people have a completely false image about the Middle East. Is that the truth about Iraq, Afghanistan is not about terrorists. They're in there for heroin or opium that they're extracting. The truth about ISIS is that ISIS was funded by the United States government against Bashar al-Assad, and even Wesley Clark, the United States general, admitted that. Also notice, or actually now he's former general, and ISIS, they don't even really make it that secret.
Wesley Clark also called for American dissidents to be thrown in camp, so he's not a saint.
No, it's not like he's a good whistleblower general. No, it's not that he just says how it is, but he's supportive of the agenda as it is. He's also the one that said that the United States will invade 7 countries in 5 years, which it almost has kept on that pace. And they've done interventions of, I think, in every country besides Iran is the only one that they didn't get on this list. Wesley Clark is.
And Republicans and Democrats are just as. They just as supportive of ISIS, one group from another. They send McCain on these missions to meet with the head of ISIS, al-Baghdadi, who's shown in several images, including which shown on CNN. I mean, these guys later turned out to be ISIS, and they're saying that they're moderates. I mean, al-Nusra and ISIS are basically the same thing. Al-Nusra was never really moderate, but that's how they're portraying it. So we have to always see that imperialism is going to try to deceive the masses, and the only way to combat that is through revolutionary struggle.
Well, yeah, in Syria, they try to make it seem like to say that at this point, especially, really at any point of the war, to say that any of the rebels that were fighting were really moderate, it's just different degrees of extremism. Because even the Free Syrian Army, that's described as the most moderate group that's on the rebels, has been doing suicide bombings since almost the beginning of the war, all the way back to 2011. They have been ones that have been caught eating the organs of a Syrian army commander, and then they were the same ones that were crucifying Christians in a Christian village, I think, was the Free Syrian Army. I mean, these people are not, moderate by any means, and all the groups are, extremists that the United States have funded. And ISIS, for one, is that people will always say, well, Islam has to do a big part of this. It's like, it's not really true, because there was a captive of ISIS that came back to the United States, and he said that he didn't even see a Quran laying around when he was in captivity. So, you would think that a group that talks about having a caliphate and talks about, bringing Islam to the entire world would at least have a Quran laying around. They didn't even have a Quran laying around. Where do they learn Islam from? I mean, they don't even pray in the right direction. They're praying in different directions.
They actually proved that the CIA made certain Qurans that they sent to Afghanistan. So this type of Islam is literally out of CIA fabricated books. It's not just the Wahhabism. It's recent stuff,
Well, Wahhabism is tainted at its own end, but, this is literally CIA manufactured Islam, and it's not real Islam. What it is a cult of death that they've created around these ISIS people, and it's like they know so little about Islam, they don't even pray in the right direction. You see a picture where one's praying one direction, the one's praying the other direction. They all pray in the same direction, no matter where you are. You always pray east, even if you are 1 mile.
I had a picture of one group of ISIS guys praying in one direction, the other with another. I mean, they don't even know how to pray right. These are just dumb brutes that are mostly European converts that they're using to carry out these attacks.
Well, it's funny. It's like also a group that's this group that's people think is a completely Middle Eastern group. Truth is that a lot of the people are exported from. They're exported from Israel. They're exported from Europe. They're exported from the United States.
How is the desert, Chris? You're going to have your body completely covered. They don't want to show how white they are. They don't want to show the European faces. The Middle East knows ISIS was invented by Israel in the United States. Most of the Middle East knows that.
Well, they don't want to show their true faces, and the fact that they take off their mask and some of them have red beards and stuff like that, or gingers. I mean, that would look a little bit silly.
Yeah, a lot of the Chechen people are redheaded, so the Chechens have been Muslim for a long time. But again, these are not Syrians fighting in Syria. They're sent to Syria from other countries, the majority.
Foreign mercenaries. I mean, people thought Assad was crazy at the beginning when he was calling these people foreign mercenaries from the beginning. But I think more people are starting to realize what's really going on. But the funny thing is, Americans are still supportive of the agenda against Assad. And I wanted to mention Syria. I know it's off topic from Trotsky, but it's gotten heated. I mean, this weekend really. I mean, right now, just this last week, Israel has been training on the Golan Heights, and they're posturing to invade. It looks like over false threats. They made up stuff about how they're being threatened by Hezbollah and that they're going to go in. And invade into an intervention against Hezbollah and Assad.
The biggest enemy of Hezbollah are ISIS, and Israel uses ISIS as a proxy against Hezbollah and against Assad, who they're allied with.
Well, yeah, they use ISIS as proxies against any of the people that are against the Zionist Western plans and their agenda, and the Houthis, that's another group that are anti-Western,
in Yemen,
anti-New World Order. The Houthis, and these people, ISIS and the Houthis have been very mortal. They've been mortal enemies in Yemen, and Israel comes out strongly against the Houthis. I mean, it really proves that Israel is a giant sponsor of terrorism, along with the United States government and the Saudis. And, I think that really it's getting more imminent, because if Israel wants to invade, the United States is going to follow them into Syria as well. And then once Syria is invaded, Iran will probably have to help their ally. I mean, I really doubt Iran's just going to sit on the sidelines while Syria gets destroyed by the United States and Israel forces even worse than they already are. I think that, if it invades the United States...
This is on topic. You know why? Because Trotsky was a known anti-Zionist. They actually liked to use Trotsky whenever they looked for a Bolshevik member to talk against the Zionist movement in Russia at that time, because he was Jewish. Not by religion, because he was an atheist, as most Bolsheviks were, but by culture, absolutely. He was raised, or at least his parents were of the Jewish heritage. So there was a lot of Jewish Bolsheviks that came out and spoke against Zionism because they thought it a threat to Bolshevism as well, because they were nationalists. They were national chauvinists. And the Bolsheviks, the socialists, were internationalists, and they thought that the conditions of the Jews would better with the fall of the Tsar, with the end of pogroms, which they did better tremendously under Lenin. With Stalin, there was some setbacks. But certainly, Zionism was a small group among the Jews. Most Jews were of the left at that time. So, for people to claim that, the kibbutz or the settlements that were built in Israel in the beginning in 1948 were socialist, yeah, they could have been making a type of socialist community for themselves, but real socialism was for internationalism, erasing the borders, reaching out to the Palestinian brothers, etc. And that's not what the Zionists were doing.
Well, another thing they point out, too, is the small faction of actual Zionists. Yes, there were Zionists in the Bolshevik movement that were pretty quickly alienated and kicked out of the movement. Trotsky was anti-Zionist himself. Lenin was anti-Zionist.
Lenin was part Jewish.
Yeah, Lenin was a quarter Jewish, actually, and Trotsky was, full Jewish by culture. None of them, not many were actually. There were a lot of Jewish culturally, but not a lot of Jewish.
Kerensky, not Kerensky. I can't think of his name right now, but it's with a K. One of the main Bolsheviks, who was Trotsky's brother-in-law, also Jewish.
Well, yeah, there were a lot of Jewish.
Kamenev. His name was Kamenev, and later he was a victim at the Moscow trials when they went after the old guard of the Bolsheviks.
And the ironic thing is that Stalin, in the long run, his oppression, he ended up, he ended up killing a lot of the Bolsheviks who were Jewish. But in the long run, in 1948, when Israel was became a state officially by the United Nations, the United States and the Soviet Union were the first two countries to recognize it as a state.
It's like those two countries did not recognize it as a state, the other ones wouldn't have fallen behind. Because remember, this was at the Cold War, where if you were with the United States, you were with Russia. There was no other. There was very few neutrals.
But also another thing I wanted to mention is that I think that the whole idea again, the whole it's I don't even know how people even get this connection, is that the Zionist and Bolshevik connection is that they always call them Zionists. When it's
just as absurd, and I don't want to be too hard on Vince because he's friendly, but it is absurd. It's just as absurd as saying that the gold that the Canadians let Trotsky take to Russia and that the Germans let him take to Russia, that they were working together when they were literally on the front lines fighting each other. The Canadians entered World War II before the United States. They were fighting the Germans. We got a caller in.
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, you're on the air.
Yo. Hey, how are you guys, man? This is Chuck. How y'all doing, man?
Oh, yeah, Chuck. Chuck's a friend of Luciana. We're just writing him on Facebook earlier. Tomascadas couldn't call in. How's it going?
I'm doing all right. How are you guys doing, man?
Good. So you're familiar with Trotsky a little bit, right? I mean, we were talking about history of revolution and stuff like that.
Cool with I'm like political with the whole Chicano movement and stuff, but about Trotsky, to be honest with you, I don't have too much background on.
Well, he died in Mexico, and Diego Rivera, there's hardly a Mexican in the world who doesn't know who that is, or that was.
Yeah.
He exactly, Trotsky in his home, right? So he definitely was, a supporter of the struggles of the Latin Americans. He went to exile in Mexico, died there, and befriended Diego Rivera, who helped get him asylum, He lived there with Frida Kahlo.
Okay, bro, bro, I'm never, I've heard of Trotsky, but I'm not too familiar with him, to be honest with you. Like, I'm familiar with, like, Fidel and, you know, Che, Fidel,
Chicano,
and
for people that don't know
Marcos.
what that means, because we have all different type of listeners, Chicano refers to Mexicans, but Mexicans living in the United States, is that right?
No, yeah, Mexican American, like pretty much, yeah, like yeah, bro.
So what do you think of this whole Trump thing? Trump wants to round up 12 million people of Mexican, that are undocumented workers, probably mostly of Mexican origin. He wants to round up 12 million people and deport them from the country, including their children born in this country. What do you think of that?
Bro, like the whole situation, bro, I'm gonna tell you the truth, it's fucking scary, bro, and people are hiding their head in the sand. Like the majority of people are being like the ostrich, and they're putting their head in the sand, and that's not gonna solve anything, bro. They're running away from the problem, bro. And I see it getting really like ugly, bro. Because like for one, the Democratic Party does not have a strong candidate, I believe, because I would rock with Bernie Sanders, but we're not ready, bro. Like, no one's ready. Like, the country's not ready. He's too progressive for everyone right now, bro. And I'm just admitting it up front that the majority of people are not going to vote for him. You know what I mean?
Well, he's for reform, right? So you could say a progressive reformist, but certainly he's not a revolutionary. And I think that American youth in particular are ready for a revolutionary. They just don't have one that's available. Nobody's come out of the woodwork. So, Luciano, you have any comment on that?
I don't know, man. I don't know what to tell you about that.
I gotta say is that Trump again. It's not Trump. It's not Bush. It's not Clinton. It's not Sanders. It's nobody's really the problem here. It's the fact that whoever wins the election, it's going to be who the super rich want to win the election. Trump is not the threat of this election. It's an indictment of this election. The indictment is the system that Trump, can switch from Democrat to Republican for one thing. It shows how little difference, that the parties have between each other. Remember, Trump used to be a big supporter of the Democrats and the Democrat policies, and now he's the forerunner of the Republicans. And, it's Trump is an indictment also of the fact that a lot of things are wrong with America. The fact that, so many people be quick to jump aboard such, a person that's openly racist and pretty much openly fascist in a way. There's new things that are coming out by his wife that said that he used to keep Hitler speeches by his bedside, and even what he accidentally put in one of his campaign posters on his Facebook. He put a picture of, support the troops, but the ironic thing, the troops weren't our troops. They were Nazi troops. They were the American flag.
Yeah, I heard about that, yeah. And Trump's grandparents were German, of course, yeah.
His wife, I bet his wife couldn't have been.
We're talking about his ex-wife, I think, yeah.
Well, his ex-wife was, I believe, her parents would have been, or she would have been born in the Soviet Union, because she was like Lithuanian or Ukrainian or something. I don't know exactly.
She was Eastern European, yeah.
This is about Mexicans, bro.
Again,
don't want to be a minority, bro. I'm gonna tell you all the truth, bro. Whites are fucking petrified that they're gonna be the minority, bro, and they fear Mexicans because we have large families, and they want to fucking trip us out, bro. They're killing blacks at an alarming rate, bro. Once a week, bodies are piling on top of bodies, bro. And now they're keeping immigrants in for-profit fucking camps, bro. This shit is real, dude. They're trying to get rid of us.
Concentration camps. They're setting it up. I mean, how are they going to take in 12 million people, right? They have to build the camps.
That's what
they have to do the camps and process them to throw them out or take them out. Who knows?
Trump wants to turn this place into, Trump, he really goes along with the agenda of turning this place into a, pretty much a prison, a big, which would probably only be done by a military dictatorship in the long run. I mean, Ventura has talked about this for years, about FEMA camps, open up these giant concentration camps to send Americans. And right now they've already done with immigrants, they've already set it up for immigrants. I mean, this goes all the way back to the Rex 84, which was the original idea. And they'll put dissidents, they'll put immigrants, they'll put a lot of different people in those camps when the time comes. They'll probably put Middle Easterners along within there. I mean, this country is very quickly starting to descend itself into that nightmare military dictatorship that Trotsky predicted. Talk about Trotsky, he predicted that in his writings, that America would end up being just like Italy, just like the many different military dictatorships that were happening across Europe.
What is fascism and how to fight it? That book that I sent you, Chris, on Trotsky, he talked about the future of the United States being like that. And like I mentioned earlier, before Chuck called in, one of my classes at my college is Italian, and he agreed with me that his ancestors, they were around when Mussolini came to power, and he sees a lot of similarities, knowing his history, with how the rise of fascism came to Italy, with what's going on now in the United States with the merger of the corporations and the state, culminating in the persona of Trump right now.
Well, yeah, all I have to say really is that this guy is popular. This guy has, a big lead over, when it comes to popular support, he's a big lead over anybody else in his party, and, he's got a comparable, if it really looks like it's going to come down to, the most two popular candidates, they're going to be Trump or Hillary Clinton, or if it's not Trump, then it's going to be Jeb Bush. The truth is that this is all a rigged game, this elections, and that that's not our option. We can't elect the revolution, and we have to fight for the revolution.
Venezuela had a transformational revolutionary, or eventually became revolutionary party, which brought Chavez to power. So you have to fight it on three levels. It's a movement. It's not just an election. But elections can also happen in Latin America. Three levels. Fighting the Electoral College, so we have the direct vote in this country. Having presidential candidates join the debate so they can have more access. And ballot access. Those are the three biggest obstacles to third-party independence taking part in the political process. Reform cannot change these things. You have to have
the Electoral College is ran by, the Electoral College is kept very secret. It's very secretive who's on the Electoral College, and the reason why there's no transparency on it is because these people really have direct connections back to the Bilderberg Committee, and the Bilderberg Committee is pretty much ultimately the ultimate corporate meeting house of many different and also many different people of power. This was actually an organization that really arise from, I think, from ex-Nazis that the Bilderberg was originally formed, like the United States government after World War II.
Well, immediately after World War II, almost immediately, the CIA started taking in Nazis, and brought them to Latin America. So definitely there was, in their alliance against Russia, ex-Nazis were part of the U.S. government, and that they joined a committee will be no surprise to me.
Well, I think that's how it was ex-Nazis, and it was definitely fascists that made the Bilderberg Committee, and the Bilderberg Committee pretty much is what is running the elections right now as we know it, and that they
Ross Perot almost won. If he had stayed the course, he would have won. He was ahead of the other candidates. He was ahead of Bush. He was ahead of Clinton. He was an independent, unknown guy who wasn't bought off, who was invited to presidential debates. After Ross Perot, they said no more. So they made it almost impossible now for third-party people to be part of the debates. I mean, look at the debates that George took part in Minnesota. That changed everything. He had no chance to win up until then. So when people see actual third-party people debating, the majority of people will essentially like them when they're talking about the real issues. And that's why they're preventing that as well. You can't call our country a democracy. I mean, when the Green Party candidates showed up in 2012, they were put in chains and arrested. They can't even exercise their basic rights.
Well, yeah, Ross Perot, though, Ross Perot, I think that in a way it's a new script that's almost being written. I think that eventually it's going to be just like the '92 election. There's going to be a Bush, this time Jeb Bush instead of Bush Sr., and there's going to be Hillary instead of Bill. That's going to be as your Clinton.
Maybe Trump will say something so stupid that there'll be no way he'll continue, and then he'll go over to Jeb. Yeah. And
I think
Cruz is not even born in this country.
An independent guy that's gonna end up getting 10, 20%. He's just gonna be kind of a distraction. I think the Trump circus, even if he doesn't secure a nomination, it's just gonna continue, and the Trump circus will continue as him run as an independent. He's not gonna give up. He's too egotistical for that. I mean, he'd probably be like, "Oh, giving up even with all this dumb stuff I said, that's for losers. I'll continue doing this election, and I'm gonna continue. I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna make America great, like I said I was gonna make it."
Yeah, you kind of sound like Trump there. I don't know. Anyways, I wanted to ask you, Luciano. I met Immoral Technique up in Philly as well as you. What was it like? I've talked about on the air my brief encounter with Immortal. What was it like meeting with him as a fellow artist and Latino, Luciano?
Oh man, it was great. It was great. I didn't know that we came from the same roots. And
Yeah, I told you he's
and,
Peruvian, just like my father. And Luciano, you're Peruvian too, right?
yeah, yeah, I'm actually full Peruvian. I was raised in Peru for like 9 years before I came here. That's my first language. And meeting him was man, incredible because I've always heard his music and related to him, and I used to have him in a pedestal, but when I met him, he was like he was just another guy,
Exactly. A very humble guy, yeah.
And
Luciano?
Wait, are we talking about Mortal Technique now?
Yeah, Luciano, I can't hear him now. Chuck, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Have you been Immortal?
I've seen him perform before, man. I've seen him perform. I haven't gotten the opportunity to speak with him, but I've seen his performance, and
do you rap
man,
as well?
He's a good artist, man. What?
Chuck, do you rap as well?
Yeah, I do battles. You know what I mean? I battle too and stuff in Spanish. With LBL, and I've had battles with Guevara and stuff like that.
And you're in California, right?
Yeah, I'm close. I'm about an hour away from the Bay Area, but an hour south.
We're up in the other Bay Area, man. We're over here in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, we're in the Tampa Bay. We're in the one in Florida. Not San Francisco here.
Oh, nice. Oh, you guys are by Frisco?
No, I'm saying we're not San Francisco or California. We're Tampa Bay, Florida.
Oh, shit.
I know San Francisco, but it looks like Luciano cut out. Hopefully he can call back. Yep. He knows the number of the show, yeah.
Well, yeah, I wanted to mention is that Immortal Technique, I mean, it's funny because all the people that actually have, Al's met Immortal Technique, Luciano met Immortal Technique, and all the other people that we know that met Immortal Technique, they all debunked, Gabe Rivera's claim about Immortal Technique. I mean,
no, his name's Gabe Rivera. There was a guy called in our show once, Chuck, and the very first thing he said, this is just after I met Immortal, the very first thing he said is Immortal's a cokehead, he's for killing protesters in Ukraine because he won a Russia Today TV. Then I come to find out this guy, Dave Rivera, I don't know if that's his real name, he's a supporter of InfoWars, of Alex Jones' show. And come to find out, Alex Jones in 2013 had interviewed Immortal Technique and treated him very well. So the guy's a complete contradiction. I believe we have Luciano back. Is that you, Luciano?
Yes, I'm sorry. My phone died, and I had to go run for my charger.
No problem, and I can actually hear you better now. But yeah, we were talking with Chuck about, the fact that he likes to do rap battles. He knows about Immortal Technique. A lot of people all over the world that know about Immortal Technique. But if you get to meet him, you see he's just another one of the guys, and he's a very cool and down-to-earth guy, not a sellout. His lyrics, have made a lot of people aware of the injustices going on in the world. In Palestine as well, I love the song he does with Low Key, who's an Iraqi-British guy, Voice of the Voiceless, talking about Palestine and what they're going through. So that's essentially what artists or activists should do, is give voice to those that don't have one.
Especially those that have a way to relate to all these kids that need guidance. I think they should start preaching and educating the kids, through lyrics. That's why I was so flattered about meeting him and knowing that he's from my country. And now I've extended my circle a little more, and I have a friend that's a really close friend with him that was supposed to call in today. But
that's all right. We got Chuck on the air at least, and we had a caller earlier.
Well, yeah, we had that. We had the one guy that was trying just the claims about Trotsky, and I think we should mention a little bit more about Trotsky since that was the original name. This is the original show that we're doing. Plus, I mean, this is a pretty big anniversary. I mean, this is 3/4 of a century since the world lost Trotsky. A lot of stuff's went on since Trotsky's death. I mean, now it looks like we're towards the point in the world of towards a war in the middle, a gigantic war in the Middle East. Not just what these littler wars have been. like Iraq and Afghanistan, but, one with Syria, Iran, United States, and Israel could be very imminent with what we've seen the last week.
And our world is much smaller now, Chris, if you think about it. In great part thanks to the internet for the past 15 some odd years. As the internet has expanded. Pedro Poeta, for example, is an artist from our area. He's been on the program. He was with me in Philly. And, Pedro can reach out to somebody in California or in Egypt or wherever. And the internet makes our world smaller. Therefore, we can unite behind those common ideas using the internet. The internet has its good and its bad, but it can be used for social media. Yeah.
Is that I think that the internet, it was created, it was put out there, but I don't think they had this in mind. I think that, I think that
they the elites that they helped let it be, right?
Well, I think that the truth was that they still try to control the internet. They try to distract people instead of people going and looking up, researching, and educating themselves. Why do you think the internet is? What is it? Some ridiculous number like 15% porn? It's not because there are that many people just want to upload porn. It's that they let it on there so people are distracted. I mean, it's
that's a big distraction, Chris.
It's a nice pair of tits to look at.
Yeah, that's how they're saying. That's a big distraction. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a giant distraction. I mean, I know Americans. It's like American, people. They spend a lot of time with a lot more time than they should compared to what they they could be, or they're doing stuff like trying to get an easy hookup on the internet or something like that.
Okay, that's what I don't get. How can you marry somebody that you never met? There's literally people getting engaged and they only know each other through Skype cam. Like, unless you meet them in person, you don't know if there's chemistry or not. I mean, this is not the type of international I'm talking about. When I say internationalism, if you want to start a relationship, go meet the person, go live in the area or something. But the way the internet's doing it, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And of course, when they do marry, they're divorced within a week.
Well, you know what it is? It's a monetization. Even if they have made a business even out of marrying people. Russia mail order brides and that kind of stuff. And it's really that's what it's really about. Actually, what happened with a lot of that stuff is that
unemployment in Russia is at 5%. In the United States, the youth, it's up to 50%. So I don't know what the Russian mail order bride's about. It should be the other way around. You should be having American women now offering themselves to get married in Russia,
Yeah, you'd think I think that was more of a thing back in the 90s, when Russia had their economic crisis, especially like towards 98 when they had the when their economy went to free fall along with there was a lot of
economies. And Orange is the New Black series. There's a Russian bride, but she's actually Ukrainian. Which makes sense because the Ukrainian economy is destroyed, not just by the civil war, but by the IMF loans that they gave the so-called nationalists in Western Ukraine who were basically fascists.
Yeah. Another thing is that I think the internet, but the internet, I do give it credit for this, is that I would never have talked to. I mean, think about the people we've had on our show personally. We've had Rosalind, Fueler, that writes for RT and a model. And she lives all the way in Dublin, Ireland. I mean, that's crazy that we were able to interview her. And somebody that lives
from Canada. That's a good thing about Skype. You can call it to radio programs from anywhere in the world.
Yeah, we didn't used to get that. We didn't used to get international.
By the way, Luciano said he had problems with the charger, so he had to drop out. But it was good he was able to contribute with the conversation. And Chuck, you're free to ask us any questions as well.
Yeah, man. I mean, bro. I would just I'm just gonna maybe just give an opinion, bro. Because I don't think because I'm only 28 years old, and I don't think my generation has seen a bigger struggle than we're seeing right now. With Donald Trump.
Well, I'm 30, and Chris is younger than you. So we're really the voice of the youth here as well. And I write about it. The vanguard. The vanguard throughout history of the revolutions have been the youth. Che was 30 the same age as me when he entered Havana. When the Cuban Revolution started. You know about Fidel. You know about Che. So the youth really are. Fidel was 32. So the youth are really essential to revolutionary movements, right?
Yeah. We're out here in Watsonville. We're about. I do some work with the Brown Berets out here. You know what I mean? The Watson chapter, it's like, I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Brown Berets before, but it's just more like a local movement.
Is it kind of like the Young Lords?
It's inspired kind of by the Black Panthers a little bit, but it's like, you know, they wear brown berets instead of black berets.
The Young Lords were like the equivalent of the Puerto Rican Black Panthers. But certainly groups like Brown Beret, I mean, there needs to be militant groups defending the minorities in this country. Look at the threat to people like Trump. I mean, we need to have a militant group defending us, right?
Yeah. And we need to have exactly, and that's what we're trying to bring it back, because with the Brown Berets, they kind of dissolved, but now there's an issue, like, there's a big cause out there, and I mean, I have a feeling that they're just going to install them in office no matter what, you know what I mean?
Who's going to be in office?
Like, I don't think Donald Trump, like, it doesn't matter if he really wins the election or not, like, they're going to make it seem like he won. Like, I don't know, I can't really trust American elections.
Yeah, absolutely, they're rigged, and Electoral College, as we mentioned earlier. Go ahead, Chris.
Like the Al Gore thing with Al Gore had the majority votes, you know, but the Electoral College, and who the fuck, like, that, it made no sense to me whatsoever, you know, and I was young back then.
And according to the Constitution, the Supreme Court should have never decided that in the first place. And that happened here in Florida. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, you know, I think, again, it doesn't really matter. They pick, really, when you look at who wins the primaries, especially the last two elections, it doesn't matter who wins the actual general election, because they're both going to support the same policies. I mean, it's a rigged game, the elections, and I think that ultimately, my prediction is that, and say I called it first, is that Trump will be pushed out to an independent candidate. He'll still be in there all the way till the end. He'll get about 10% support. I say that Jeb Bush is going to come in I think Jeb Bush won't win the nomination. I think Rubio is going to surprise everybody. I'm going to make a surprise pick. Rubio is going to shock everybody. He's going to pick Walker as his vice president, and Hillary Clinton's going to win to be selected, and she's going to pick O'Malley as her vice president, and that's going to be your
Well, the thing about O'Malley is when the Black Lives Matter people yelled at him, "No reform revolution," he said, "Oh, I agree with you," and then he went on to talk about education reform. I mean, people like O'Malley and Bernie, they're reformists. They're not revolutionaries. They're not listening to what revolutionaries like Black Lives Matter people at their core are talking about.
Yeah, those people, you know, the Black Lives Matter, you know, they knew that Hillary Clinton and O'Malley are full of shit, you know, and that's why they yell at both of them. You know, and there was a very awkward videotaping recently that's actually kind of made into the mainstream, showing Hillary Clinton's fakeness about this whole supporting black rights, supporting, really a continuation of the civil rights movement. And some people say the civil rights movement in the 60s, I think it never really ended, and what we're seeing is a resurgence. They push towards
was rescinded by the Supreme Court recently. You know that. I mean, the same voting rights that we had in the 60s, we no longer have in the 21st century. So there's still a long struggle.
Yeah, it's very. But again,
I feel like, we never had our own civil rights movement. You know, it's like the new civil rights movement, but it's for Latinos, for all Latinos, not just Mexicans, and not just all of us together, you know?
That's what I was going to say, Chuck, because Cesar Chavez was great, but we need another leader like that, or Hugo Chavez, for that matter. When I was in Philly, we didn't just meet on Moral Technique. I met Rebel Diaz. They had just arrived from Venezuela. So, there are artists that are here in America that are Latin that are supporting the Venezuelan Revolution. They see the example. They see the history. And look, some Latinos will say, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Cuban. Let them go after the Mexicans. I don't care. Well, you know what? If you let them go after them, they're going to eventually come after you. That's what happened in Nazi Germany. Chris is half Colombian and half Peruvian myself. I mean, us Latin people will end up being persecuted like the Jews were in Russia or Germany, etc. If we just let this go by, and then they'll come for others, so-called minorities as well. And I say so-called minority, Chuck, because the majority of people in the world will be considered people of color, right? So we might be a minority here in the United States, but worldwide we aren't minorities. So the Anglo-Saxon domination in the United States, that could change in a few directions, because you said earlier, Chuck, that Latin Americans have many children. And you say the same thing about Palestine. The Zionist obsession of keeping the majority, the so-called Jewish majority. Palestinian or Arab families have much more children than the Israelis do. What do you think about the whole Zionist thing, Chuck?
What do you mean?
The Israeli how they treat Arab people. Don't you see similarities?
Oh, bro, it's horrible, bro. And this is the thing, like, the U.S. government back, like, they pretty much created Israel after World War II. They just, like, Britain and the U.S. government, they just, like, pretty much installed Israel over in Palestine and just called it Israel. And, you don't know, this is the prosecution of people of color and white supremacy. It's fucking colonizing, bro. There's no other way to fucking put it, bro. Like, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but that's just the only way I could put it. It's disgusting, you know? And it's just white supremacy and people of color being slaughtered, and that's bottom line. That's what it is.
Colonialism, but that's what the essence of Zionism is when you see what's going on in the Middle East and how they're supporting, you know, terror groups to go after anti-Zionist leaders like Assad. I mean, it's all connected. You have to know the history, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Israel. It's not just a threat to the Palestinians; they're a threat not even just to the Middle East; they're a threat to the entire world's peace. You know, and you know, it's funny that the last president that really that pointed this out, you know, he ended up with a bullet in the back of his head, and you know, he also opposed the Federal Reserve. I mean, JFK. That's the true reason why he died. He wanted to put nuclear inspectors into Israel and stop them from cheap nuclear weapons is part of the reason, and also the Federal Reserve, and also it's all tied together. The establishment wanted him dead. CIA, you know, which at the time Dulles ran, and there was actually H.W. Bush was already.
Well, Dulles was just fired by Kennedy before he died, and Dulles was on the Warren Commission to investigate Kennedy's death. Like, do you investigate the death of your former boss who fired you? Does that make any sense?
No, it does not. You know, and there was extreme conflict of interest with the Warren Commission there. And, you know, the Warren Commission, I think everybody kind of knew, especially back then, I think there was a lot more opposition to the Warren, to the whole investigation of JFK's death, because they...
Well, it didn't come out later until in New Orleans, thanks to that prosecutor, that the Warren Commission were a fraud. The American masses were completely misinformed on that. This was before internet and alternative media. So it wasn't until much later when that prosecutor in New Orleans came out, you know, which the JFK movie made by Oliver Stone is about, that people started realizing that the Warren Commission was a fraud. People didn't go in and actually investigate it until that came out with the prosecutor, who they tried to you know, portray as a loony, but eventually was vindicated when a lot of these facts on the conspiracy there came out. So look, essentially, Kennedy and Khrushchev were trying to end the Cold War, and both were taken out. Khrushchev, not literally, he was deposed from power the year after Kennedy was killed in '64. But, you know, that to me is the main reason, is that they were both trying to end the Cold War. They both had their faults, you know, but essentially they wanted to end the Cold War, and there was too many military and banker interests so it had to continue, you know. So Trotsky was a man of peace. He helped end World War I. And, you know, I don't think Trotsky would have wanted a Cold War either. He would have wanted Russia to be strong, but he would have probably taken steps to prevent Russia from bankrupting itself, which the Stalinists essentially did in competing with the United States, which is part of the reason why the Soviet Union fell.
Well, yeah, I'm going to put the number out there one more time as we're in the last 10-ish minutes of the show. 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. We have about 10 minutes left. And I think Trotsky would have made, I think, Russia even bigger of a superpower than it was under Stalin. But at the same time would have de-escalated the Cold War very quickly. And I think that, you know, the thing, if Trotsky or...
He would have kept Hitler in check if Hitler was even irrelevant, thanks to Trotsky's, you know, leading Russia after Lenin. It would have been a completely different history.
I think eventually, you know, when you talk about the Cold War and the JFK era, Trotsky probably wouldn't have been alive because he would have been very elderly by the time that JFK became president. But whoever he would have picked to succeed him, I think that, you know, without the, you know, I think that person...
It would have been the Russian people. Remember, Trotsky was for workers' democracy. The Russian people would have picked the next guy, and he would probably be a guy that was among Trotsky's followers because they were maintaining those same principles.
Well, I think, you know, there could have been a possibility that Khrushchev would have been the one that he supported after he fell, you know, because I think that Trotsky...
I don't think Khrushchev would have rose to power at all, because Khrushchev never rehabilitated Trotsky. He was part of Stalin's group. He did try to de-Stalinize Russia, but I don't think Khrushchev would have been known if Trotsky was in power. He wouldn't even rose up.
Well, that's questionable, true, but I think that Khrushchev did have some maybe not Trotsky, but he had at least he was more He was at least a Bolshevik supporter, unlike Stalin. Stalin was anti-Bolshevik. He was a Bolshevik at one point, fighting fighting with the Bolsheviks, but he was not.
Stalin called for caution, and Lenin and Trotsky said, "Look, Stalin, you're irrelevant. We're not going to have caution. We're going to go ahead with the Russian Revolution." But Stalin, years later, in this film about the Russian Revolution, made the roles reverse. He made Trotsky be the one that called for caution. And like we said before, Stalin was like one of the inventors of Photoshop. He literally took pictures of Lenin and Trotsky together in the Revolution and erased Trotsky from the image. So that's like the culmination of revisionist history right there.
And without the internet, that's how the pictures would be pretty much. I mean, it'd be very hard to get an archive photo of prior to, the editing of the photo. And, Stalin not only did that, he practically did many things. 1984 is kind of loosely based off of, in some ways, some of the stuff that's presented in 1984 is presented off of Stalin's regime.
We're talking about George Orwell's book. And as we mentioned earlier, the Spanish Civil War, George Orwell fought the fascists and was persecuted by Stalinists and forced to leave Spain. And within weeks of the end of the Spanish Civil War, when Franco, the fascist, took over, Stalin had the pact with Hitler. Of course, Hitler backed Franco. So this part of the history people don't go over has been revised by the so-called victors. But now the truth is coming out, in part thanks to alternative radio by revolutionaries.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking, it was funny, Stalin, you talked about how he fought for fascism in the Russian Civil War, and, and didn't really have an ideology is true, because, really, Trotsky and Lenin already formed their ideology. Stalin, all he did was brute force. He was just a bank robber.
He was a bureaucrat and an opportunist
for the Bolshevik Revolution. And he was just really about himself. He was a narcissist. That's pretty much well documented that he was a narcissist, and he was superior to everybody else. And it wasn't just he didn't just set up a cult of personality to do that. He actually believed the stuff that his propaganda machine told about him. It's not like he just said stuff that he didn't believe.
They said they entered Berlin victorious. Stalin never set foot in Berlin. In the entire World War II, he was hiding in a bunker underneath Moscow.
Yeah, I mean, that fact, that the people, modern-day Stalinists always say, oh, but what about World War II? But I always point out the fact that if Trotsky was around, World War II would have been fought way more efficient, less deaths for Russia, and Hitler would have been not as irrelevant. I think that he couldn't have prevented World War II altogether from happening, but I think that he could have, for not signing a non-aggression pact, that was signed on this day 76 years ago. If that wasn't signed, Russia could have immediately started chipping away at Germany's military machine before they even got very powerful. Because by the time that Germany invaded Russia in 1941, they were at the height of their power.
You know what I just realized for the first time, Chris? The day that Trotsky was killed, because Trotsky wrote articles all the time, wrote a couple of books in exile. The day Trotsky was killed, he was probably preparing an article condemning the pact between Hitler and Stalin or at least talking about it, that happened a year prior. So we have now a clue to one of the last works that was not completed by Trotsky because of that anniversary that we pointed out.
Well, yeah, again, if Trotsky was the leader, I think that they would have chipped away at the German military machine well before it got any too powerful to handle. I think
Stalin was reckless. Khrushchev at that time was calling on Stalin as one of his commanders to have a tactical retreat, and Stalin said no. And thousands of useless deaths. I mean, millions by the end of it. I heard of 25 to 30 million Russians died, more than the end of the nation, thanks to the Nazi advance. And thanks to the recklessness of Stalin for not doing those necessary tactical retreats, just sending men into the front, and then if they returned, they themselves were shot by their own commanders. And he liquidated the generals of the Red Army, accusing them of Trotskyism, which by then was ridiculous. So he left Russia vulnerable. He was doing a useless war against Finland that even Russia was losing against little Finland. And Hitler was laughing his ass off during the pact and said, let's go ahead and invade Russia, which they almost accomplished. They were able to almost enter Moscow within a few days.
Well, Finland had a fascist government that was actually sympathetic with Hitler, so it was actually kind of
it was useless because they lost. Because the Finnish actually had the upper hand on the Russians, thanks to the recklessness of Stalin ignoring Khrushchev's advice. They didn't even know where the Finnish artillery was. They could have found that out. So, I'm not saying that the war against Finland wasn't just. Finland was fascist. I'm just saying that it was useless in the end because Russia didn't take out the regime in Finland, and the Germans went ahead and invaded Russia.
Well, another thing that one of it really came down in our reality. It was not Stalin had very little impact of actually the Russia winning the war. It was all the lower people. It was all the lower officers. It was the generals had a big part of it, of course. There was all these lower officers, like Khrushchev was one of them.
Those that survived, right? Because as we said, a lot of the head generals of the Red Army, Stalin had executed.
And Khrushchev actually brought like you said, he was the one that actually brought the point that they needed to do tactical retreats, but they never did that. And Stalin would just
and Hitler, and you know that what Khrushchev remembered,
just expect them to deal with them.
But Hitler in the bunker in Eastern Germany was even saying that when they were losing, he said, "I should have taken out all my generals like Stalin did with the Red Army." But if he did that, they probably would have been on equal terms with the Russians. They would have the advance like they had for much of the war. But when Hitler declared war against the United States, he made all the odds against him at that point. They did have the upper hand for a while in Russia. 90% of the casualties taken by the Germans were Russians, right? So by the time D-Day came, Russia already destroyed 90% of the German army and had taken at least equal numbers on that, or more actually, 25 or 30 million. Bigger population, but so all these aspects of the histories are ignored. The imperialists or the so-called victors tend to write the history. But it's on us to find the facts, and to reveal it to the masses.
Well, I think Trotsky, he really started the wave of revolution that led up to the modern day revolution. Che inspired a lot of the modern day revolution, and now was Chavez, and and Che inspired many different people across the Middle East that were important. I think I think in many ways, in the ways that Gaddafi governed Libya, I don't know if he actually had any personal influence by Che, but it was kind of similar to what Che wanted of a country that that was ideally.
Che met with Nasser, was a supporter of Nasser, and Nasser helped get Gaddafi to power. So there is an indirect connection there.
Yeah, I knew there wasn't probably a direct connection, but there was kind of an indirect connection between Che and Gaddafi, and definitely in the way Gaddafi governed would have been how Che would have governed if he ever.
And Gaddafi was personal friends with Tito of Yugoslavia. They did have a similar style of governing.
Yeah, and Gaddafi had some, and now Chavez is, was another one of the same era, that just recently both of them, fell out of power, but both died, in the last 5 years, and then now this new wave, really, we haven't yet to see, but I think that they'll need to look at the new wave of revolution has to look at the old wave of revolution, look at Trotsky, look at Lenin in order for them to be successful, because now, if Mexico, if there's a successful revolution, we'll need to look at the old guard. There's a lot of revolutionaries that don't have a strong, they're not even really true revolutionaries, that don't have a strong ideological base. And they just are, they're fighting to be fighting, but they're not fighting for any cause. And they need to look at the cause of Trotsky. They need to look at what Trotsky fought for all the way up to 3/4 of a century ago. Now, 3/4 of a century later, we're at a very crucial point. It's make or break at this point. And if we don't make it, we're going to have, things are going to break. There's going to be war.
I was going to say, make it or break it. And we're on the last minute or a little more than a minute of the show. Then we'll be having the other Moral Technique song to leave the program. But we'd like to thank everybody for listening. Thank Chuck for calling in for the last part of the show. Chris, if you wanted to say a couple last things about Trotsky for everybody, because I've said plenty already. I've read some of Trotsky's words.
Well, we're actually the last seconds of the show, but I'm just going to say, everybody, thanks for tuning in tonight to Voice of Rebellion Radio. We're going to do our fifth show of the month next week, and should be the Immortal Technique song should be coming on now. 10:59 usually does. So again, thanks everybody. By the way, we're going to be having Rosalind Fuller at some point down the road on our Blog Talk radio show on Stave Old Radio, just to let everybody know.
Yeah, because of time differences, yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be like a month later down the road. Yeah, we couldn't have her on this show because they would be starting at 2 a.m. over there. But she wasn't exactly that receptive to that idea. We did have her on at 1 a.m. over there. That's her time when we had her the first time back in March.
We're drinking some Irish coffee.